Shalom, Boker Tov. This video is for Dr. Henry Abramson, if he chooses to click the link and watch it. Um, so I'm finding myself in a bit of an interesting, sort of a moral or intellectual conflict, I guess you could say, because to me, I do not have the luxury of consuming data mindlessly. I have to make it a priority to, prioritize data that's applicable to real life, that benefits me in terms of self-preservation and thriving. I love your data. You're very well articulated. You cite all your sources. You're awesome. Great channel, great video, great content, and great data source. The conflict, just to give you some context, I have schizophrenia. Give you more context on that. The Spanish Catholic origins, my family is Mondragon, Conquistador. They've been in Taos, New Mexico since 1608. And because Catholicism is a theft and, mutilation of Judaism, they followed the law of Moses against intermarriage, which they saw the Native Americans as heathens. Therefore, to sleep with one was akin to bestiality, or to breed with one. So very inbred, but not as inbred as the Native Americans, who had prolonged intergenerational incest from being isolated in the Americas. There was some assimilation because they have 30% Native American DNA. And this is relevant because the Native American pancreas and liver doesn't secrete the enzymes necessary to process and metabolize alcohol into sugar. Therefore, alcohol overdose death rate per ethnicity is the highest, like 13%, just like Aborigines. Lactose intolerance, diabetes, etc. But the Spanish, my mom's side, is where I get schizophrenia, a gene mutation caused by inbreeding. So my understanding is a lot of Orthodox Jewish communities have a lot of special needs within the Hasidic community from the same thing. Yet, I'm not saying race mixing is necessarily good or bad. It's pros and cons of both. Her intelligence is hereditary, and Ashkenazi have, some of the highest IQ averages per ethnicity on the planet. That declines with intermarriage. 2% of the population of the United States, but over 50% of the billionaires are Ashkenazi. This is just an objective analysis. This is not a moral condemnation nor approval. So, with the push of marijuana by, in my opinion, very greedy globalist bankers and people who do not care about the lives their cannabis industry destroys, the suicides, the homicides, the rapes, the assaults, the robberies, the vehicular fatalities, etc. They only care about the money. What got me into Judaism was I was in Seattle, or the Puget Sound area, and I electrocuted myself for whales and trees in a severe schizophrenic episode brought on by the cannabis I was smoking. I self-inflicted 3 amputations with 70,000 volts, along with third-degree burns over 40% of my body. Sorry, still waking up. Over 40% of my body, and a brain injury. And Puget Sound is very secular. So to me, it's like white people. There's a lot of Ashkenazi in the Puget Sound. I figured this out. And therefore they're very liberal, and it's a hypersexualized hookup culture of drug abuse and addiction. So I thought that returning to Christianity after 20 years as an atheist would get me into a community or society that was moral, right? A pocket of morality within a socio-cultural environment saturated with immorality, hypersexualized hookup culture of drug abuse and addiction. I was wrong. Every church that I've tried this out have drugs and just all sorts of things that go against their orthodoxy doesn't match their orthopraxy. Just like Reform Jews and conservative Jews, my understanding is Orthodox, Reform, and conservative are just 3 different things. Reform Judaism is modernization. Conservative Judaism is the transitional phase between Reform and Orthodox is traditional, just like politics. So, even though I was let down severely by Christians, without exception, every single time, my faith kind of became stronger. I still question Hashem a lot. I mean, what sort of God would allow these things to happen, right? But I wanted to convert. I've been eating kosher, poor man's kosher. I can't afford certified kosher food, but I don't mix meat and dairy. I don't eat pork. I don't eat shellfish. I keep Shabbat, but I do break one mitzvot. Um, and eventually, this is relevant to you because I came across this online conversion to Judaism program, which, whew, it's converting to Judaism.net or studyjudaism.net. I think it's converting to Judaism.net. And they were kind of cool. They agreed with me on a lot of my points, but they said, but you can't say that in the main chat and WhatsApp because it's offensive. So, despite being portraying themselves as orthodox, sorry, I took up tobacco again because the tobacco helps counter the effects of the secondhand smoke somehow. There's a whole science behind that. I think it's the gate control theory. Anyhow, they claim to be Orthodox, but they had women in charge. They officiated gay marriages as Orthodox rabbis, etc. And these are red flags to me. These are signs that their orthodoxy also doesn't match their orthopraxy. For example, there is a woman who is Reform, and she was going towards Orthodox because of her many disappointments with the hyper-liberalism of Reform Judaism. We had this conversation about marijuana. She said she was an addiction counselor, and regulation never works because the cause of all addiction is trauma, which I disagreed with. And I pointed out that trauma cannot be quantified because the trauma response cannot be environmentally measured. There are people who will go through war, for example, witness their best friends die right next to them, etc., and not display the same involuntary stress response or involuntary emotional response, where others are triggered by mere pixels on a screen and mean words on the internet and think it's traumatic to go without social media, Facebook, the internet, whatever, for 2 hours. Hilariously, she proved me right by saying, oh, and then also, I pointed out that, Islamic theocracies, certain Islamic theocracies, have much lower rates of STDs, as well as drug abuse and addiction, so clearly their orthodoxy matches their orthopraxy. So you could argue they have higher rates of trauma, but lower rates of drug use. Therefore, this defeats the notion that all addiction is caused by trauma. To me, this is just simple objectivity, objective facts. But she got triggered and quit the conversation. And I got put on, warning. But later on, in one of the online shiurs, this woman asked about Christianity, and I pointed out that Christianity was Roman state propaganda to subvert Jews to Roman rule through their own religion. And this was done through the Flavians, right? Titus and his family, and the Club of Rome, the Alexanders, right? I watched Caesar's Messiah by Joseph Atwell. And so Josephus was a turncoat Jew who helped the Romans subvert Jews. And the rabbi said, I'm going to cut you off right there. There's no source that states that Josephus was Jewish. And I didn't say anything in the shiur. I held my tongue. I said, okay, I'll shut up. And later on in the WhatsApp group, I cited you as a source, Dr. Henry Abramson. I said, Dr. Henry Abramson is an expert on Jewish history, and here's his source. This is the actual source, Josephus himself. And I shared a link to your video. Now, instead of getting an apology or admitting that I was right, because I felt like I was being accused of either being stupid or being a liar, I got kicked out of the group for starting conflict, which wasn't my goal. I just sought the truth, regardless of emotions. I think that emotional detachment is essential for objectivity in analysis, which is essential for accuracy in analysis. So I think you're a rabbi. It didn't make any sense that you, an expert historian, Jewish historian, and a rabbi, could be wrong despite citing your sources. Whereas this other rabbi who claims to be Orthodox but officiates gay marriages disagreed with you and not only called me a liar, called you a liar. It was insane. Whew. On top of that, I was attending Citizen Cafe and they kicked me out because Jewish hyperliberalism. I offended people with what they thought was inappropriate humor, but to me, it's just American freedom of speech humor. It's really interesting stuff. I was doing great in the class. I was learning Hebrew very well. I was excelling. I'm one of those people who, if I'm taking a class, I'm not just, I put into it what I get out of it. So I put a lot into it. I wrote out my Hebrew word list every day, right? Not the whole list, but it's like 2,000 words, I think. So I'd write out like 25 to 50 a day. On top of that, I say the Jewish prayers. Like when I wash my hands before I eat, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu al netilat yadayim. And I love it. I love Judaism. It's far more intelligent, profoundly more intelligent than Christianity. But my goal for converting to Judaism, one of many, is that maybe I could find a community where I can get this sort of, in-group care and support that Christianity failed. Right now I'm trying to think of where I'm going to move next because it's being pushed everywhere. Marijuana and CBD/hemp, which is essentially the same thing. I mean, Delta-9 concentrates, etc. But it seems like I cannot find in the online Judaism course the moral pocket that I sought. And there's a lot of interesting little details to that. They charge $250 to $500 per student. They're very nice. They work with me because I was on disability to $250. They do a sliding scale based on your income. But that's a lot of money every month. They have over 150 students. I've heard rabbis on YouTube warn against anyone who uses Torah for money, for profit. On top of that, it seems like they're just selling conversion. They're not sticking to my understanding of authentic Judaism. They are lowering and eliminating some of the standards to convert as many goyim, essentially non-ethnic Jews, as possible to the religion of Judaism. It's almost like reformists who have infiltrated Orthodox and are pretending to be Orthodox in word, but reformist in action. I haven't read it, Rabbi Eleazar, but personally I agree with the whole thing about women shouldn't teach Torah, etc. That's my vague understanding of Rabbi Eleazar's take. And so where I go from here, I don't think I can infiltrate and assimilate to an Orthodox Jewish community that will be free of drugs and alcohol. Alcohol is also bad for me. I don't drink either. Secondhand marijuana is involuntary exposure. That secondhand marijuana smoke causes me hallucinations, suicidal, homicidal thoughts, voices in my head, etc. This is scientifically backed. It's not a religious standpoint. And the atheists, despite claiming to be all about the science, have this behavior that is observable that I've ever found. Very rare is there an atheist who is anti-marijuana, let alone an atheist community that's drug-free. I think that was, of course, the result of brainwashing from the drug and sex revolution of the 1960s, but I digress. I'm considering, trying to just apply all my book reading to make the most optimal decision towards location for residence. And I don't know if it's feasible to seek that in Judaism in general, because, online Judaism at least, was clearly not consistent with authentic Judaism, at least in this particular program. Anyhow, Hayom Tova or Hayom Tov. Toda Rabah, Lehitrayot.